All right, this is part two of the Avatar Chronicles book review, and this is Yangchen's books, The Dawn of Yangchen and The Legacy of Yangchen. So I talked last video about how good the Kyoshi books were, and I think that these were also good, but for a different reason. You know, like the Kyoshi books, those were really good in terms of like the story, but also like the fights that were in it. Those were pretty cool and interesting. But then the Yang Chen books kind of went in a more political route and slowed things down. And I seen that a lot of people didn't like that. You know, a lot of people were hoping that there were more fights and more, action instead of like the slower paced, more like political and um, dialogue and stuff like that. They didn't like that, I guess, but I liked it. So the main, I guess, events within this story started with the Platinum Affair. Now, this pretty much started, bro. Jesus Christ, is that like a trash truck? Oh my gosh. But anyways, the Platinum Affair, it pretty much started by the Earth King, the Water Tribe Chieftain, and the Fire Lord's actions at the time. Because what happened was the Fire Lord and the Water Tribe Chief, Chief Oyaluk, they were pretty much trying to come together to work with one of the generals from the Earth Kingdom, General Nong, to take Earth King Feishan out of power. And in retaliation, Earth King Feishan isolated the entire Earth Kingdom from trading with the other nations, and then he was also pretty much at a standoff with his own people because there were a ton of other like political leaders backing General Nong. So now it's like you have a potential civil war in the Earth Kingdom, and then you also have people conspiring to take you out of power from the other nations. So, they pretty much all isolated themselves, and then again in retaliation, the Fire Lord and the Water Tribe Chief did the same thing, which again, I don't even know why they did that because like at least Earth King Feishan had a reason because he isolated his nation in in hopes of like getting away from them, like they were the ones working together to try and gang up on the Earth Kingdom. But I don't know why they isolated themselves, but anyways, all three of the nations closed off their doors to each other, and then that pretty much by extension closed off any access for the air nomads to travel because they are pretty much able to go freely into any other nation since everybody knows that they're peaceful and stuff like that. So they didn't ever really have a problem until now where everyone was isolated and at a standoff with each other. And because of this issue, the Platinum Affair, then we saw the rise of four cities specifically. It was Port Tuguac, Ben Air, and oh god, what were the other cities? Let me see. Um, yeah, Platinum Affair. Oh. Okay, yeah, right here. So it was Jandari, Benair, Port Tuguac, and then Taku. We didn't get to see much of Taku throughout this book, or more about Port Tuguac. We kind of got to see more about it in the second book, but not too much in the first book. But Benair and Jandari, those were the main two. Cities that they were focused on. But anyways, those four cities within the Earth Kingdom pretty much rose to power to take things into their own hands, and all of the noble and merchant families within those areas elected one single leader, and that was Henche, who was the Zhangdu for Benair, the main area that we were at in the book, and then Chasey was the Zhangdu in Jandari, and then Port Tuguac, who was Port Tuguac, Ashuna, yeah, and then Iwashi was the Zhangdu of Taku. So, anyways, these four leaders they pretty much ruled these areas, and they were making this plan called unanimity. And unanimity, which we find out a lot later, it was pretty much their goal to get some sort of like power or at least some leverage over the other nations that would pretty much put them in a position of power and take power from the world leaders who they thought were pretty corrupt, like they're just over here messing up all the people's lives because of their petty issues. So instead of like the Earth Kingdom, or not the Earth Kingdom, the Earth King and the Fire Lord and the Water Tribe Chief ruling over the nations, it would just be those four people instead of the four world leaders that we have. So, anyways, eventually we find out that Project Unanimity was combustion benders. So we know how strong combustion benders are. We know that they're able to freaking take on the strongest benders. Even the average combustion bender can do it, because we see Combustion Man in Avatar: The Last Airbender, and then we saw Pali in Legend of Korra. So they're pretty fucking strong, and the fact that they had multiple combustion benders was crazy. Like they had 3 specifically, and those 3 combustion benders were pretty much going to seize power across the world. And they were actually planning on taking out the world rulers at a meeting that they were supposed to have. They were all supposed to meet in the water tribes, and they were going to go over there and kind of like scout the area out. And then when they got their opportunity, they were going to kill the water chief, the Fire Lord, and the Earth Kingdom all in one go. So that was pretty much Team Avatar's mission, and Yangchen's mission specifically, to go over there and stop them. So throughout the entire book, they were struggling. They were struggling to even get some information on what was going on, because Chasey and Hinche, they were pretty manipulative. Like, I would say they're some of the smartest characters in the series. They were able to outsmart Yangchen, Kavik, Kalyan, all them. But we'll get to Kalyan as well later, because he's going to come up a lot. But anyways, these two were pretty much the minds behind what was going on. And the other 2 Zhongdus, of course they were involved, but they weren't involved as much as these 2. So our main issues throughout these books were Hinche and Chasey. But eventually we see that Kalyan, who we all thought was dead, ended up being alive. And not only was he alive, he killed Hinche. So we find out that he killed Hinche, the Zhongdu, and we all thought that they were friends, because that was the whole thing that they said. They said that they had grown up, and then Hinche kept mentioning like, "Oh, I got a person on standby that can solve all my issues." And it was just funny, because like the whole time he was hyping up Kalyan as like his best friend, his partner, and stuff like that, and his key to pretty much solving all these issues. And then we just see Kalyan kill him. So anyways, Kalyan assassinates him, and then we find out in another crazy plot twist that Kalyan and Chasey were together. Now, Kalyan is Kavik's older brother, but I was more so thinking that he was like maybe in his like early to mid 20s at most. And then they did say Chasey was middle-aged, but they said, I think she was like kind of like towards the older side. Or I don't know if they said that or if I was just thinking that. But anyways, I did not expect them to be together. But it made sense the whole time now that I think about it, because Kalyan, he kept mentioning like, "Oh, I do everything for this family." Him and Kavik were always trying to provide for their parents, because the whole entire reason that they had to move to Benair was because things weren't looking good back in the water tribes, because world trade was stopped. All the nations weren't trading with each other. Certain areas weren't getting certain necessary supplies, or supplies, I mean. But so anyways, they had to move to Benair, and that was when Kalyan and Kavik started getting involved in some stuff that they shouldn't have been getting into. And then Kavik, he ended up going down a whole rabbit hole of issues himself, because he got caught by Yangchen when he was trying to steal from her blue manse. I think it was called like the Blue Mansion. and she caught him, and she basically came to his house and kind of like recruited him, and he ended up going along with that even though he didn't want to at first, and then they built their whole relationship. But anyways, um they were getting into a lot of stuff that they shouldn't have been getting into, and then Callion ended up having a kid with Chasey, because the whole time, they kept saying that she was pregnant and expecting a baby. So now it all made sense, because Callion, he wasn't lying, like he was doing all of what he was doing to protect his family, but it was just different people in his family. We thought he was protecting Kavik and his parents, trying to keep them out of trouble and keep them fed and stuff like that. But in reality, he could have just been talking about Chasey, who was his wife or girlfriend, if you want to say, and his expected child. So, anyways, Kavik is freaking out. He's like, "When did all this happen? Like I knew you were involved in some crazy stuff, but like you're pretty much at the top of the pyramid, pretty much. Like you're working with the top tier criminals that we're all fighting against, and you're over here just making it seem like this is not an issue." So then another awkward moment came up when Yangchen got confronted by Callion. Now this was like super awkward because throughout the whole book, Kavik, he kind of felt like looked down upon. Like everybody treated him like the little sibling. Like Yangchen kind of excluded him from some stuff, and rightfully so, because throughout the book, Kavik, he ended up betraying her at the end of Dawn of Yangchen by kind of like withholding some evidence towards her and not giving her the full picture, which could have stopped the issue way sooner. But anyways, she kind of like was treating him like a little brother at moments. Callion is obviously his older brother, so he's gonna think of him as a little sibling all the time. So it was just like pretty much everybody was treating him as a joke, or like somebody that's just in the way. And that same thing happened here when Callion confronted Yangchen, because he was like, "You're gonna stop manipulating my brother and getting him into all these issues." And then Yang Chen, she was like, "I apologize. I hope I didn't drag you into anything," and stuff like that. So they were kind of trying to repair their friendship. And then you had the rest of Team Avatar, which was Jujinta, who was like a former Yuyan archer from the Fire Nation. And then you had Tayagum and Akudan, who had worked pretty closely to the Water Tribe chief as like some not servants, but like as almost like military people. So her whole group was pretty strong, but it was also scary because they were trying to freaking beat shit out of Kavik after his betrayal, because he kind of uprooted their whole life. Like the whole entire mission was going good, and then he goes and betrays them, and then it set everything back. They had to go back into hiding, and then they pretty much just saw it as like, dude, like you just messed our whole life up. We had a good house, we had good everything, the whole mission was going good, and then you come over here and just mess everything up. So they were frustrated, and eventually, Yang Chen and the rest of the group, they make tons of crazy plans to finally capture the combustion benders, and they had to like keep them within the air temple. And this was where it was kind of crazy, because Yang Chen, she eventually got like almost banned or exiled from the air temple, because they saw it as like tainting their brothers, because the head of that air temple, I think it was the southern air temple if I'm not mistaken, but he was kind of like saying like, dude, like you're over here having our freaking air nomad brothers like control these combustion benders, and who knows what that could do to their mind, like thinking that like oppressing people is okay, or at least like imprisoning people is okay. Like it's not a good look for their culture. So they pretty much kicked her out, and she wasn't too mad about it. She knew that she had to do what she had to do, and if that meant betraying her beliefs that she grew up with, then so be it. But eventually, they still end up taking down the combustion benders, and then they actually got assistance from one of the combustion benders who actually kind of became like an integral part into Team Avatar. I was glad that they made her more of a character because, like, from the way it was looking, I thought they were just gonna make it to where she was there just to be like giving info to Yangchen, and then they would just get rid of her. But she was like more of a character, and they went in depth on her and the other combustion benders' backgrounds a lot more. And she told them how they got their powers in the first place, like they were forced to go underwater and fire bend, which then created combustion bending. So then they eventually make their way to the one of the islands in the Fire Nation, where they find two more survivors. These are like kid combustion benders. And one of the kids couldn't combustion bend, but they didn't even know that one of them could combustion bend. So as they were about to leave and go back, one of the kids freaking blew up Yang Chen's bison. So I was like, oh my fucking gosh. Because, like I said yesterday, bro, it's like the writers really have something against the Bisons in the Avatar series, bro. Like, Yang Chen's Bison got done terribly. Aang's, Kelsong's, Jinpa. It's like every time we see a Sky Bison, something always goes wrong with their the Sky Bison's owner, or even the Sky Bison themselves. Like, they get damaged. It's like, dang, bro, y'all really hate the fucking Sky Bisons. So they, anyways, Yang Chen was frustrated, and she ended up pretty much like solving the issue by the end. And then she took control of Ben Air and Jandari. So after they dealt with Chasey, and she pretty much scared her shitless, she had her standing on the outside of the building, because Chasey throughout the entire book, she was almost like Tagaka, to like how Tagaka was to Kyoshi in her books. That was almost the same role that Chasey played here. It was like, it was a cat and mouse game the whole entire time. Like, who's gonna outsmart who's gonna catch who doing this. So anyways, after the whole time of Chasey acting like she was a badass and shit like that, Yang Chen, she finally got her, scared her, and pretty much took all of what they had. And then meanwhile, Kavik, he was having a fight with his brother Kalyan, and this was when the two factions came against each other, because the White Lotus finally, after gathering all the info they needed, because we also found out that Ayunarak was part of the White Lotus, and then one of these other kids that was the same age as Kavik, he was in there as well. But they had finally gathered all the evidence that they needed. And then when Kalyan and Kavik were talking on the bench, that was when the White Lotus popped out. And then the group that Kalyan had of his men, they came out too. So it was just everybody, and then it was a full on fucking fight. And then Jujinta fucking stabs Kavik. I was like, what the fuck? Because at first I was like, oh, because what's her name? Yang Chen, she had said earlier, like, bro, we all sacrificed something for this mission. Like, Akudan and Tayagum, they had to pretty much give up all of their stuff. They had a good life going for themselves, and now they had to come pretty much, on this whole extra mission, because Kavik didn't explain the whole thing and give them all the information, which could have stopped the fucking unanimity way sooner. Like, they could have recovered the combustion benders, but instead he let them get away on the boat, land, and then he told them where it would be afterwards. So Yang Chen was out there searching for all these fucking ships where they're supposed to be, and they weren't there. So anyways, they're all frustrated. Like, Jujinta, he finally kind of like built up the trust to Kavik, or maybe not built up the trust, but at least wasn't like as standoffish towards him as he was in the beginning. But then after the betrayal, he wanted to fucking kill Kavik. And because he was also saying like the whole time he didn't really have a purpose in life, and his brother had died because he killed him and stuff like that. So he was trying to find his purpose, and he kind of like switched roles with Kavik, if that makes sense, because Kavik kind of had it all. Like he had his family alive. Um, then on top of that, he had a good bond with the Avatar. You know, they were friends, or there were some times in the book that it kind of alluded to them liking each other. But he was kind of like frustrated with Kavik. He's like, bro, you gave up all that shit when I'm over here searching for a purpose and trying to get closer to the Avatar. So then he was pretty much saying like, I won't let you do anything to fuck over us ever again. I don't care what the Avatar says, if she'll let me kill you or not. I'm gonna fucking do it for me. So he stabbed him, and I thought that he took that moment as an opportunity. Everybody's fighting, so you can't really tell what the hell is going on. And I thought he just did that to stab Kavik and get him out of the way under Yangchen's orders. Because she, again, like I said, going back to that, she said that he's gonna end up having to sacrifice something too if he wants to fucking finish this mission. And I thought that meant that he was gonna fucking like sacrifice his life. But luckily, we found out that the plan was also including Kavik, so he did know about everything, and it was also part of his plan to get stabbed, which was crazy. I wouldn't have been able to do that. But anyways, Akudon and Tayagum, they were kind of like fucking trolling him and shit. They're like, "Oh, we're not gonna heal you." It's like, nigga, get over here and fucking heal me. So anyways, they heal him, and they kind of forgive him for all the stuff because they see that he was able to, put his relationship with Kalyan aside to finally like end this mission, dude. Because if he kept going along with what his brother was telling him, like they would have never been able to finish this mission. And then we see that Yang Chen and Kavik go back to the spirit world through the water oasis in the water tribes. And that's where she connects with her sister Jetsum, who I wish we would have seen a lot more. Like Jetsum was Yang Chen's sister, but I feel like they really didn't get to show her a lot more compared to like Kalyan. Like I thought they were gonna get the same amount of screen time being the older siblings to Kavik and Yang Chen. But even though Kalyan ended up playing a much bigger part in the story, Jetsun, she was still dead. They didn't reveal her to be left alive like they did with Kalyan. So they kind of like shoehorned in some moments for her at the very end of the book where she was talking to Yang Chen in the spirit world about like how to continue, being a good avatar and stuff like that. And I just wish we would have saw more, at least more flashbacks. If they can't make her be revealed to be alive, I guess, then have more flashbacks to when Yang Chen was a lot younger. And then that was another thing that I mentioned last video, the Salwan clan. Yeah, throughout this book, the Salwan clan, they were like fucking over the spirits, so this wasn't like a human versus human issue like how it was in the Kyoshi books where the Salwan clan and the Kyoso clan were going back and forth. This was the Salwan clan kind of like messing up the land of the spirits. So these spirits, they kept telling Yang Chen like, bro, stop giving them chances. You keep allowing them to mess our land up, and you keep saying like, oh, just give it one more chance and I'll do this and that. It's like, no, bro, you have to get them out of here or else we're gonna take things into our own hands. And so that was what ended up happening. And after the Salwan betrayed their promise to Yang Chen again, then she had to go out there and fucking yell at them again, but after taking down the spirits, which I thought kind of sucked because it's like, dude, you can't punish the spirits for defending their land, especially after they came to you first. They didn't even have to come to her, but they came to her first, told her to deal with the issue. She didn't deal with the issue to a good enough manner to where they were convinced to stop, and then they ended up doing the same shit again, and then they retaliated on the humans. So, like I said, man, that Sauron clan and the Fire Nation, bro, they just start all the fucking problems. Like, Jesus Christ. But yeah, overall, I thought Team Avatar was pretty cool. You know, Yangchen's group, I would say they were cool, but I gravitated more towards Kiyoshi's group. You know, like I feel like each member played a pretty big part in that story, and they were all interesting to some capacity. Like you had Heiron, Jianzu, Kelsong, and they were also part of Karuk's group, so that was why they were extra important. You know, it wasn't just Kiyoshi's like mentors and parental figures; they were also like important to another great avatar. And then you had Yoon, who was a great antagonist and side character early on, and then Rangi, who was one of the best characters in my opinion. But in this book, you know, Akudon and Tayagum, they were interesting, but I think they should have went more in depth on them because, like I said, they worked close to the Water Chief Oilute, so I feel like they should have went more into detail about them. Jujinta, they kind of went into more detail with him, but like in like sprinkled little moments. But again, I would have liked more fleshed out story from his arc because I thought his story was pretty interesting too, about how he was like a skilled non-bender in the Fire Nation. And Ayunarak, I was surprised by her change because originally she was like the head of like this specific area in Ben Air, where they kind of like took in a bunch of people that migrated from the water tribes to Ben Air, and she was like taking care of them all. So we just thought that she was almost like Aunt Mui in the Kyoshi books, where she was just, you know, like almost like a cook and a mother figure and stuff like that. But then she was revealed to be a high ranking member in the fucking White Lotus, which was crazy. And then she tried to initiate Kavik by the end of the first book. And Kavik was kind of like, you know, he didn't want to fully do it. And then he definitely didn't want to do it after he was talking to that kid in the White Lotus, who he didn't think that highly of, but then he was actually kind of wise, and Kavik was making note of that. Um, so overall, I thought the characters were pretty interesting, but I think they should have been more fleshed out, like how the Kyoshi books were. I thought the plot was pretty interesting. The plot twists were interesting. Um, Another big thing I would have wanted to see more is the other Zhongdus. Like Yang Chen's books, they went more in depth on Henshe and Chasey. Like Henshe was pretty much the main focus of the first book, and then Chasey was the main focus of the second book. But I think that they should have kind of like condensed those into the first book, and then have the second book be for the other two Zhongdus, because you know I don't really see a point in them having four Zhongdus in four cities if we're not even going to talk about half of them. So I would have wanted to see more about those. The White Lotus side plot, I thought that was pretty interesting. And Unanimity, you know, it was a great goal, I guess, to see that again another rare sub-bending element was so like important back then, because it was like the same thing that I mentioned in the last video with Zhu Ping An being a lightning bender. Like it was so rare in these times to see bending skills like that, that people were pretty much treating this as like a end all be all type of like leverage against somebody else. So the fact that they were gonna have just three combustion benders almost like take over the world. Like these fucking combustion benders were blowing entire cities up and buildings up throughout this book. And it was just crazy that even Yang Chen, she had to go so far as to be able to make a technique to literally like take the air out of stuff and make them like pass out before they could gather enough energy to combustion bend. So I thought that was pretty cool. Yang Chen, she was a cool avatar. I liked her personality. Again, I would say I would put her a little bit below Kyoshi, but she was still great. Um, I like how she was also not a traditional airbending avatar like Aang. You know, she was a lot more dismissive of her beliefs at times. Like, there was even a point in the book where she was willing to eat meat at Kavik's parents' house because they, you know, they're from the water tribe, of course, so they cook a lot of food with meat. And she's like, oh, it's fine. Um, you know, so she wasn't like too caught up in her beliefs, and she would be able to put them aside when she needed to, which I liked. And Kavik, you know, a lot of people didn't like how much focus he had in the book because it was kind of like half and half. It was half Yangchen focused and then half Kavik focused. And I think that that was good because if it didn't focus much on him, it kind of would have been weird, especially with how important the White Lotus and Ayunarak and Kalyan and all those characters were because they're from his side of the story. So if you take him out, you're kind of like removing the bridge between what Yang Chen has going on and then this whole side plot with the White Lotus and then finding out more about Taegum. I mean, not Taegum, Kalyan, and eventually by extension the other Zhandus and stuff like that. So I think he was very important for this story. He was an entertaining character. Maybe not as entertaining as like Rangi or something, if that's what people were mad about, but I thought he was still a good character. Kalyan, he was pretty cool. You know, he was always spying and outsmarting everybody in this entire book. You know, he betrayed Henche and assassinated him. He was constantly outsmarting Team Avatar and Kavik. He was outsmarting the White Lotus at times. You know, like they were having a struggle finding information. So it was a cool book. You know, this book wasn't more action packed like Kiyoshi's books were, but it was still cool with like all the political stuff and the spies and whatnot. So yeah, I would say Dawn of Yang Chen was like I would say Dawn of Yang Chen was a 10, and the Legacy of Yang Chen, I would say that was like a 9, almost like the same ratings as the Kyochi books. Because this writer was, it was really good. So next, I'll have to check out the Roku books. I know the first one is already out, but the second one comes out the 30th of this month, and I'll probably just wait until they come out in a bundle or something like how these ones did, and then I'll buy them together and then make a video for those. But yeah, I would say these books were great. I highly recommend if you're a fan of this series and you haven't already read Avatar Chronicles.